Lawyers for the president are trying to limit the scope of any future interview between Donald Trump and Bob Mueller. They have turned over documents to the Mueller team on the firings of Michael Flynn and James Comey, according to a report in the Washington Post. This comes amid speculation the president may be seeking to fire Mueller. However, Republican leaders are denying that.
The special counsel should be free to follow through his investigation to its completion without interference. Absolutely. I am confident that he'll be able to do that. I've received assurances that his firing is not even under consideration.
Let's bring in John Yoo, a former Deputy Assistant Attorney General under President George W. Bush, and attorney Michael Moore from Pope McGlamry. So glad to have you both here. Michael, if I could start with you, can you explain to me the process of how it works that the Mueller team would try to negotiate with the president's lawyers to figure out what the interview scope should be? Is that a normal occurrence, or is that something special afforded to the president?
I think it's probably better defined as something special afforded to the president. I mean, essentially the deal is this. If Mueller wants to talk to Trump, they always have the option of issuing a subpoena, having him come to a grand jury, and of course the president could take the fifth time and time again. That doesn't do anybody really any good. There are some pretty specific rules on what a federal prosecutor can and can't do in the federal grand jury. My guess is that there's some specific information that Mueller wants to get, and they're just trying to work through and navigate through how they get to that information. From Trump's side, his lawyers, this is probably their nightmare in the thought of putting Trump in a room with Mueller unless there's some pretty strict limitations on the questions and the scope of the questions that he could be asked. I mean, right. That interview that he gave where he said he got rid of Comey because of the Russia thing, that's a pretty damning piece of evidence when they're talking about an obstruction
Right,
case.
So they're trying to protect their client. Wanted to ask you, John, about this Washington Post editorial and this question of whether Republicans need to do something, even in this omnibus bill that they're going to pass on Friday night or by Friday night in order to fund the government. This is the Washington Post editorial board saying Congress should pass a bill seeking to protect Mr. Mueller from being fired without cause. Legislation along these lines exists but is languishing for lack of support among Republicans. Passing it would send a clear public message that congressional leaders have so far declined to convey. Firing Mr. Mueller would elicit a substantial real-world reaction that would severely harm the White House. Now, the White House has said, and then the Speaker just moments ago when he spoke to Jennifer Griffin said, there is no firing on the horizon. There's not even a discussion of it. Of course, that there is speculation. Would legislation like this actually have any bearing on what the president decides to do?
Dana, I think legislation would be a terrible mistake. First, we should realize this is all about partisan politics. I don't remember Democrats in Congress demanding protection for Ken Starr when he was under severe attack, much worse, actually, that's come down on Mueller about his independence as an independent counsel. Second, I think actually there's a matter of constitutional principle here. Having an independent counsel is a blemish on the constitutional structure which gives the president, and the president alone in the Constitution, the job to take care that the laws are faithfully executed. Every prosecutor in the United States and the federal government ultimately works for the president and for the attorney general. And we saw that letting someone loose, whether it's a Mueller or a Ken Starr or people before that, actually can do great constitutional harm. So I think members of Congress should say, look, we want to have someone like Mueller, someone who's independent, but we're not going to try to upset the separation of powers and create a special protection for him.
I knew that you were the constitutional expert, so I wanted to ask you about that. And Michael, can I ask you about this? Because the president is added somebody to his legal team. Mr. DeGeneva is going to come on board. And in some ways, he's a little bit more combative than maybe the other attorneys on the team so far. The White House not saying that there would be actually any additional changes, but there are rumors in the New York Times and elsewhere that there possibly are additional changes to that legal team. In a course of an investigation like this, is that a normal set of events, or do you think that there is something more concerning here for the president's team?
You know, my experience has been that you don't hire a bomb thrower unless you think you're losing the battle. And I think really that's probably where we're at now. I think the Trump team has made a calculation that in a court of law, they may have some real problems. And as I mentioned, that's the thing with the interview and getting rid of Comey and those other things that could be obstruction and obstructive type acts. So I think they're probably playing now more toward the court of public opinion and trying to control the dialogue there, to control discussion. They've got a new person out there who likes to say things that can be far out. Let me say, he's probably a fine lawyer. He's a former U.S. attorney, and I think that says a lot about him. But I think they're really just trying to inflame the jury of the public out there, and that's what they see as their next move. There's some discussion they may be bringing Ted Olson in, outstanding lawyer. That's a different game. I think they may be looking at him more from the legal side. But again, you got to keep your client under control, or it's useless. You can't have these theories out there, conspiracy theories. If you've hinged your defense and your arguments on these outrageous and outlandish conspiracy theories, then it's going to be a long day and a long process through this investigation.
John, I've got to run really quick, but I mean, it's not a terrible thing to try to win in the court of public opinion as well, right?
No, look, this is all these kind of things. Independent counsels, and particularly impeachment of president, are a combination of politics and law. This is not just a prosecution. And I think Trump would be smart to bring in Joe DeGenova and Ted Olson. If he hires those two, he's bringing the Golden State Warriors version of federal prosecution. Joe was a special counsel. Ted beat a special counsel. He took it all the way to the Supreme Court. He was President Reagan's lawyer.
Sorry, I wanted to make sure you got in there. John Yoo and Michael Moore, thank you.